Hey guys, got a real quick one for you at the moment, because when I first did the video on contrast and how I was getting on with it, I'd had them in my hands for 3 days. So by that point, I really hadn't had much of a chance to play around and kind of get the most out of them. It's ironic to some degree that for the product that's been pushed as being suitable for beginners and really handy for getting stuff out very quickly, a little bit of practice with it really is necessary to get the most out of them, I think. But we're talking 2 or 3 hours mucking around with them, you'll get great stuff. So in that video I did show off this dwarf here. He's a 3D print, and he took me about 15 minutes before work. He was off of, what was that, Orks white. And, the recipes in that I'm not going to go too far into. I can show those off at a later date. But just for the sake of mucking around with the colours that I had, he's not looking too bad. I'm not a huge fan personally of the grey as metal, but I wanted to stick to just the contrast to really see what they would do and how to put those through their paces. Now, thinking of that sort of look, what I did then was to grab an Ork. And I love this fella. This guy took a fraction of the time compared to my usual Orks. He is varnished, so there's that little bit of a shine on him, so I can play with him properly. And everything here, with the exception of the metallic stuff, is, contrast. It's all the same stuff. There's no highlighting rather, so for that result, that's all one coat of contrast. Not bad, to be perfectly honest. Which brings me to, maybe you're playing guard. And again, had a bit of a play around. The Catachans are classic miniatures, if we want to put it that way. But again, I think if you're looking at bulk infantry, stuff that you have to paint a lot of, you could put an army painted like this on the table. And if anybody wants to grizzle about, oh, they don't look as good as they could, I think they look fine. It is really about buying into the look, I think. You've got to like what they look like. If you want to spend the time painting your miniatures and have them look nicer, then of course, no one's saying that you shouldn't. But I actually quite like that. And with about 90 of his mates around him, he looked the business. Now I've got here too, more people are out there playing Cadians. What I discovered, I did this dude over Wraithbone. And then I gave it an all-over shade of Agrax Earthshade before hitting it with the contrast colours. And I think that really helped get some of the shading into the recesses and kind of bring down the brightness just a little. Again, a whole army like that, I think you're going to be happy as. I really like how that turned out. And ironically, it actually looks better than my current guard army. So maybe that's an excuse to go buy some Cadians. Oh no. Now, outside of the workshop again, here's one. I actually didn't have the orange at that point, so I've painted that on. But as a Stormtrooper, he took me 8 minutes of painting. Not counting drying time, of course. Over Corax White, I gave him the Apothecary White, which is kind of a bluey shade just for the recesses. And then once that was dry, I dry brushed him with some Praxetti White. Did in the black areas, done. Alright, if you are playing Legion and you want to play the bad guys, contrast, man. You need like 3 pots of the stuff and you're away laughing. This looks really cool, I think. Nice and simple. But the real winner for me is the Genestealer Cults. I've had a lot of fun mucking around with these guys. The only stuff on here that isn't contrast is once I've blacked in his gun a couple of times, I've given it an all-over dry brush with some Necron compound. Otherwise, that's all contrast. Unless you don't count Nighthaunt Gloom as a contrast. But I reckon it counts. But this fella, now ironically, he actually took me a little bit longer than my normal speed painting style for Genestealer Cults. But the result looks so much nicer. My 12-minute cultists, there was a video on that earlier. This guy probably took me about 15 to 20, if I'm honest. But I think the extra bit of time is really worth it. I love how that looks. It is pretty close to the box art stuff, and it's also simple. So I really just wanted to quickly set the record straight and point out that I had been a little bit premature in showing off. So now that there's a little bit more there for you to have a look at, I thought, hey, I'll share that. Ooh, and one more while I've got it in my hand. This one isn't finished, but mucking around again, Genestealer Colts, thinking of ways that you can get some variant colors out there, just having some fun with him. So there you go, guys. Just another look at how these contrast paints can be used. Maybe think outside the old workshop ranges and have some fun with them.